This feels like one of those NASCAR weeks where you can already sense the tension building across the entire garage before the full story has even come out yet. Because what happened after Watkins Glen was not just another post-race moment where a frustrated driver blows off steam for a few seconds before everyone moves on with their weekend. This thing grew into something significantly bigger very quickly, and right now the entire Cup Series garage is watching closely to see how it gets resolved. What started as an emotional confrontation on pit road after a brutal race day has now reportedly drawn the attention of NASCAR officials themselves, who are reviewing footage and radio communications to determine whether what happened crossed a line that the sanctioning body cannot simply ignore. And depending on what those officials decide, the consequences could be felt as soon as the very next race weekend. Before we get into all of it, if you are a real NASCAR fan who wants to stay on top of everything happening inside the garage every single week without missing the stories that actually matter, go ahead and subscribe to NASCAR Nation Report right now and hit that like button. We are still a growing channel chasing our goal of 15,000 subscribers, and being here this early genuinely means a lot to this community we are building together. Now let us walk through exactly what happened at Watkins Glen and why it has turned into one of the biggest talking points in NASCAR this week. The confrontation that has everyone talking happened right after the checkered flag came down at Watkins Glen International, and it completely changed the mood of what should have been a relatively straightforward post-race atmosphere. Bubba Wallace went directly to Christopher Bell on pit road, and the exchange that followed was heated, visible, and caught almost entirely on Fox cameras while post-race interviews were still happening nearby. Anyone watching could see immediately that Bubba Wallace was furious. He was animated, talking with his hands, clearly working hard to make his point in a way that left absolutely no doubt about how he was feeling. Christopher Bell, by contrast, stood there with the kind of calm and composed demeanor that NASCAR fans who follow him closely have come to recognize as his default setting. Bell did not look emotional in the way Wallace did, which almost made the tension between them feel even more uncomfortable to watch because the energy coming from each driver was so completely different. Then came the moment that really got fans paying attention and started the online conversation exploding. Wallace appeared to be winding things down and walking away from the confrontation. And then something Bell said pulled him right back into it for another exchange. Crew members were standing nearby. NASCAR officials were watching from close proximity. And suddenly the entire post-race focus at Watkins Glen had nothing to do with Shane Van Gisbergen winning the race or anything else that had happened on the track. Every conversation was about Bubba Wallace and Christopher Bell and what exactly had just happened between them on pit road. Understanding why Wallace was already at his emotional limit before that confrontation ever started is important context for making sense of the whole situation. His race day at Watkins Glen had already been genuinely painful before things boiled over after the finish. He had managed to collect a stage point earlier in the afternoon, which was a small positive in an otherwise difficult day. But the ending of the race unraveled badly for the number 23 team. Late in the going, Wallace got spun after taking contact from John Hunter Nemechek, who was running on fresher tires and pushing aggressively through traffic trying to gain positions. A lot of fans watching immediately debated whether Nemechek was too impatient in that moment, because Wallace was one of several drivers in that part of the race trying to carefully manage both his fuel and his tire life during those critical final laps. The 23 car was in a vulnerable position, and instead of waiting for a cleaner and safer opportunity to make a move, Nemechek forced the issue and Wallace paid the price for it, ending up buried in 29th place at the finish. For Bubba Wallace and for 23XI racing as a whole, that result hurt in a way that goes beyond just a single bad finish. This season has already had its share of difficult moments for that team, and every time another disappointing result gets added to the pile, it creates more internal pressure at exactly the stage of the year when playoff implications are starting to weigh on everyone. Every single point matters at this point of the season. Every bad weekend adds stress that builds on top of everything else the team is already carrying. So when the checkered flag came down and Wallace climbed out of the car, the emotional tank was already running on empty before he ever walked in Bell's direction. What has genuinely confused a lot of fans and people inside the garage is why Christopher Bell became the focus of Wallace's frustration in the first place. Bell was not involved in the contact with John Hunter Nemechek that ended Wallace's day. He was not the driver who caused the spin. That disconnect between who wrecked Wallace and who Wallace confronted is what caught everybody off guard and why the story spread so quickly. Some people inside the garage believe there may have been an earlier incident during the race that television cameras did not fully capture, something between Wallace and Bell that created tension well before the final laps. Others think Bell may have said something in the moments immediately after the finish that added fuel to what was already a very volatile, emotional situation. But neither driver provided clear public answers on Sunday evening. Wallace briefly downplayed things when leaving the infield. Bell avoided giving reporters any real explanation. That silence from both sides made the story grow even faster because it left fans with nothing but footage to analyze and questions that had no answers. Then Monday arrived and the story became considerably more serious. Multiple reports indicated that NASCAR officials had begun actively reviewing post-race footage along with radio communications from the confrontation between Wallace and Bell to determine whether what happened went beyond verbal arguing into actual physical contact. That is the detail that changes the entire weight of this situation. If NASCAR determines that the confrontation became physical on active pit road, where crew members, officials, photographers, and other drivers are all moving around in a very congested environment after the race, the penalties being discussed are not small. Sources familiar with the review process reportedly told ESPN that officials are considering options ranging from significant monetary fines all the way up to race suspensions, depending on what the footage ultimately shows. Bubba Wallace is reportedly under heavier scrutiny because officials view him as the driver who initiated the confrontation. Possible disciplinary outcomes being discussed include a fine somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 for Wallace, along with the possibility of a one-race suspension if it is determined the altercation crossed into physical territory. Christopher Bell could also face consequences if officials decide he escalated the situation after it began, with reports suggesting a potential fine in the range of $25,000 to $50,000 for Bell. Those suspensions for either driver have reportedly not been completely ruled out at this stage of the review. The reason this feels so significant is because of the history that already exists around Bubba Wallace and post-race confrontations. NASCAR fans immediately started drawing the connection to the 2022 Las Vegas incident involving Wallace and Kyle Larson, where Wallace received a one-race suspension after confronting Larson following an on-track incident. The sanctioning body has already demonstrated once that it is willing to take that serious a step when it believes a post-race situation crossed the line. That precedent is hanging over this entire story right now, whether anyone wants to openly acknowledge it or not. NASCAR has also made clear over the years that it views confrontations happening on active pit road differently and more seriously than arguments that might occur inside the garage area, precisely because of the safety risks that come with a crowded and active environment where many people who are not drivers are working and moving around. The fan reaction to all of this is genuinely divided in a way that reflects a real tension at the heart of how people feel about this sport. There are plenty of NASCAR fans who believe that emotions are simply part of racing, that drivers are passionate competitors who care deeply about results, and that confronting someone face-to-face after a rough race is something the sport should allow without immediately reaching for fines and suspensions. Those fans think NASCAR risks making the sport feel sanitized and robotic if it comes down too hard every time drivers show real emotion after difficult races. And that is a legitimate point of view that deserves to be taken seriously. Nobody wants a version of NASCAR where drivers sound like they are reading from a prepared statement after every incident. But there is another side to this that is equally legitimate. NASCAR has a responsibility to maintain safety on pit road. Crew members working in that environment are not protected the way drivers are. Officials and photographers are moving through those spaces. When emotions escalate in a congested area after a race, the potential for someone who is not a driver to get caught in the middle of something physical is real. And if the footage shows that this confrontation went beyond heated words, officials are going to have a very hard time justifying not acting on it, given what they did in Las Vegas in 2022. The next few days are going to determine whether this story settles down quietly or explodes into one of the defining controversies of the 2026 NASCAR season heading into the All-Star Race weekend. A significant fine or a suspension for Bubba Wallace at this point in the year could seriously damage the playoff hopes of the 23XI racing team, because missing even one race when playoff positioning is being actively fought over creates a hole that is very difficult to climb back out of. If Bell faces penalties too, this goes from a post-race argument into one of the biggest garage controversies of the entire season so far. The entire NASCAR world is waiting on the ruling, and the reactions when it comes are going to be loud, regardless of which direction officials decide to go.